Hey everyone, it's Taehyung. I don't know if I've ever talked about this openly before, but today I just want to be honest with you. I've been thinking a lot lately about love, about the things that happen behind the scenes, and about how easily one word from someone you trust can change everything you thought you knew. Before my wedding, before everything that came after, my manager said something to me that I will never forget. It wasn't loud, it wasn't angry, it was quiet, almost careful, but it hit me like a storm. And I think for a long time, it shaped the way I saw myself, the people I love, and the world I live in. Let me start from the beginning. We were in the middle of a hectic schedule, promotions, rehearsals, interviews, photo shoots. I was trying to balance work and my personal life, which had become complicated. My fiancé and I were planning our wedding quietly. We wanted it to be small, peaceful, and meaningful, not a grand spectacle, just something that felt real. But when you live in a world where every whisper can become a headline, even the word quiet becomes impossible. I remember sitting in the practice room late at night. Everyone else had gone home. The mirrors reflected that tired version of me that fans never see, hair messy, jacket half off, a coffee cup sitting on the floor. My manager walked in without knocking. He looked serious but calm, the way people do when they've already decided what they're going to say. Taehyung, he said, are you sure you want to do this? I smiled, thinking he was joking. What do you mean? He hesitated. The wedding, the timing, the industry isn't kind to idols who settle down early. You know that, right? I didn't respond at first. The air between us felt heavy. I knew he wasn't trying to hurt me. He was protecting something, maybe me, maybe the image that had taken years to build. But in that moment, it didn't feel like protection. It felt like distance. He said, you have to understand, people love the idea of you being available. They love the fantasy. Once that changes, so does everything else. The numbers, the fans, the image. I just don't want you to lose what you've built. There was a long pause. I looked down at the floor, at the scuffed wooden panels that had seen every version of me, the trainee who stayed late to practice, the idol who smiled on stage no matter what, the man who fell in love when he wasn't supposed to. And I said, but what if what I've built doesn't mean anything if I can't live honestly? He sighed. That's not how this world works. That sentence stayed with me. It echoed in my head for weeks. That's not how this world works. Every time I thought about the person I loved, every time I saw her waiting quietly for me after long days, I heard those words again. And I started to wonder, maybe love in this world is different. Maybe you have to hide it, protect it, wrap it in silence until it suffocates. There's a strange kind of loneliness that comes when your heart is full but your life feels like it's owned by everyone else. I would go home, close the door, and sit in the dark. Sometimes I would hum quietly, not a full song, just fragments of melodies that felt like confessions. I didn't know it then, but those melodies would later become the foundation for one of the songs that changed everything for me. I remember one night vividly, the night before I was supposed to announce my wedding plans to the team. I couldn't sleep. I walked to the piano in my living room and played a single note over and over. My reflection in the black surface looked like someone I didn't fully recognize. I whispered to myself, if being honest cost me everything, then maybe that's the price of peace. I think that was the moment I decided to stop hiding, not just from the world, but from my own fear. When I told my manager the next day that the wedding was happening no matter what, he didn't argue. He just looked at me with eyes that carried both concern and something like pride. He said, then do it your way. Just be ready for what comes. And I nodded, because I was, or at least I thought I was. That was before the headlines, before the rumors, before I realized that love in the spotlight can be the most fragile thing you'll ever have to protect. When the news finally broke, it didn't feel like a celebration. It felt like a storm, one that had been waiting quietly, gathering strength behind the clouds until it was ready to hit. I remember waking up that morning to dozens of messages. My phone screen was flooded with notifications, news articles, trending hashtags, and a mix of love and hate that no one can ever really prepare for. The words Taehyung's wedding flashed across every headline, each one slightly different, but all carrying the same kind of tension fascination wrapped in disbelief. At first, I just stared at the screen. Then I put it face down. The silence in my apartment suddenly felt too loud. I walked to the window, looking out at the city soul at dawn, a place that always feels alive, even when your own heart feels still. Cars were moving, people were rushing, and yet I felt like the world had stopped spinning just for me. I knew it was coming. I had been warned. My manager, my team, even some of the members, they all said, once this goes public, it won't just be about love anymore. It'll be about perception. And they were right. Everything turned into a performance again. Even something as human as love was suddenly a headline, a debate, a question of image and timing. Still, there was one thing that grounded me her. She didn't care about the noise. She didn't read the comments. She just looked at me and said, we'll be okay. We'll go through it together. That moment reminded me of why I loved her in the first place, because she saw me not as Taehyung, the idol, but as Taehyung, the man who still gets nervous when he says something too honest. But even with her strength beside me, the days that followed were hard. There were fans who felt betrayed, who said they had believed in an image, not in me. There were people who called it a publicity stunt, others who said it was reckless. My company tried to control the narrative, but love isn't something you can manage like a schedule. And then came the day I had to face the members. We were in the practice studio again. It was late. The air smelled like sweat, effort, and memories. Namjoon was the first to speak. He didn't say congratulations. He just said, you sure you're ready for what comes next? I nodded. I think so. He gave a small smile, the kind that says he knows you're scared, but respects that you're doing it anyway. Then make sure you protect what's real, he said. Jin laughed softly, trying to lighten the mood. Our little Taehyung is growing up, but his eyes were soft, a bit misty, like a proud older brother who knows the world won't always be kind. Yoongi leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. The media will twist it. Don't let that make you question the truth. He's always been the calm in chaos, the one who knows how to survive storms without losing himself. Hoseok just hugged me tight, wordless, the kind of hug that says everything you can't put into words. Jimin grinned, but there was a tremble in his voice. You'll be fine, Hyung. Just don't disappear from us, okay? And Taehyung me, I laughed, because that's what I do when emotions get too heavy. I laugh not because it's funny, but because it's the only thing that keeps me from breaking. That night, after everyone left, I stayed behind. I sat on the floor leaning against the mirror. The room smelled faintly of dust and echoes. I looked at my reflection and whispered, "You're getting married." It felt unreal. Not because I doubted it, but because it meant stepping into a version of life I'd only dreamed of, one that wasn't curated, edited, or staged. The next few weeks were a blur. Wedding preparations, meetings, rehearsals, photo shoots, all happening at once. The manager who once told me not to do it was now making sure everything stayed under control. I could see the conflict in his eyes, torn between his job and his heart. A few days before the ceremony, he pulled me aside. "Taehyung," he said, "I owe you an apology." I looked at him, surprised. "I didn't mean to make you doubt your choice. I just wanted to protect you from a world that doesn't forgive easily." I nodded slowly. "You were doing your job, and I understand that. But this time I needed to protect something too. Not my image, but my heart." He smiled faintly. "Then I guess we're both learning." It was the first time we saw each other not as artist and manager, but as two men who were both afraid of losing something they cared about. The night before the wedding, I couldn't sleep again. I sat with my guitar, fingers moving without thought, playing the same quiet melody I had hummed months earlier. This time, though, it didn't sound like pain. It sounded like peace. I thought about how love doesn't need permission. It doesn't follow contracts or headlines. It's quiet, simple, and often misunderstood, but it's real. And as I strummed the last chord, I realized something. The thing that shocked everyone, the thing my manager said, wasn't just about fear or control. It was about truth. He was right about one thing. This world doesn't always work the way our hearts want it to. But maybe that's why we need to live honestly anyway. Because love, at its core, isn't about being perfect in public. It's about being real in private. That night, as the city lights flickered through my window, I whispered a small promise to myself, not to the cameras, not to the fans, not to the headlines, but to the person I loved, and to the version of me that still believed in something pure. "I'll protect this," I said softly, "even if the world doesn't understand." And for the first time in a long time, I slept peacefully. When the wedding was over, I thought the noise would fade. I thought once the ceremony ended and the lights went down, everything would finally feel quiet again. But I was wrong. The moment I stepped outside that chapel, cameras were already waiting. It wasn't even supposed to be public. We had chosen a small, private place, away from the city, far from the crowd. But somehow, someone had leaked it, and before we even drove home, photos were already online. It was strange. The most sacred day of my life had turned into a public debate. Some people called it beautiful, others said it was betrayal. And suddenly, love, something so human and pure, became a headline written by strangers who had never met me. I tried to ignore it at first. I told myself it would pass. But every time I opened my phone, there it was: new articles, new comments, new interpretations. It wasn't just about the marriage anymore. It was about me as an idol. as an image, as someone who people thought they knew. I saw comments saying things like, he changed, or he's not the Taehyung we fell in love with. Some said, he should have waited, he ruined the fantasy. And for a moment, I wondered, had I really done something wrong just by choosing to be happy? There's a certain weight that comes with fame. People don't always see it, but it's there like invisible chains around your voice, your choices, your heart. You want to be honest, but honesty feels like exposure. You want to protect your love, but protection feels like secrecy. I remember one morning sitting by the window with my coffee, scrolling through headlines. My wife walked up behind me, rested her hand on my shoulder, and said softly, "Stop reading those, Taehyung. They don't know you." I looked up at her and smiled weakly. But sometimes I wonder if they ever really did. She shook her head. You don't owe them your pain. You've already given them your art. That line stayed with me. That day I made a decision. I would keep performing, keep creating, but I would no longer perform my emotions for validation. I would no longer let the world decide when I could love, laugh, or rest. But reality doesn't change overnight. Even when your heart feels at peace, the world doesn't stop talking. There were articles dissecting my every expression. Taehyung looks distant at the airport. Taehyung avoids fan questions. Taehyung seems tired lately. No one asked if I was tired because I hadn't slept, or if I looked distant because I was just trying to process everything. To them, emotion wasn't humanity, it was news. My manager tried to keep things steady. He'd call me before interviews and say, "Remember, be calm. Don't give them more stories to twist." He was right, but sometimes being calm felt like pretending. During one interview, a journalist asked me directly, "How has marriage changed you, Taehyung?" I paused. The room was silent. All the cameras were pointed at me. And I said, "It made me human again." There was a quiet gasp. The interviewer smiled awkwardly, unsure what to say next. But I meant it. Marriage didn't change me as an artist. It reminded me that I was never meant to be just an image. That night, I went home and sat on the couch next to her. The TV was on, muted. My head was resting on her shoulder, and for a few minutes, it felt like the world outside didn't exist. "Was it worth it?" she asked gently. I thought for a long time before answering. "If I lose everything else but keep this, then yes." She smiled. "Then let's hold on to this together." But even as she said that, I could feel the storm still swirling outside our little home. The judgment, the noise, the misunderstanding. It didn't scare me anymore, though. Because for the first time I realized something. Peace doesn't mean silence. It means knowing who you are even when the world is loud. And strangely, it was my manager, the same person who once told me not to go through with it, who helped me see that. A few weeks after the wedding, he came by unannounced. We sat in the studio together, surrounded by instruments and unfinished songs. He said, "I've been watching everything, and you know what? I think you did the right thing." I looked at him surprised. "You do?" He nodded. "You proved something I didn't believe in, that love doesn't destroy fame, it just tests it." I smiled. "And do you still think this world doesn't work that way?" He chuckled. "Maybe the world needs to change." That small moment, that quiet acknowledgement meant more to me than any public apology ever could. Because it wasn't about being right, it was about being understood. From that day, things started to shift inside me. I began writing songs differently, not for charts or awards, but for truth. Lyrics stopped being polished, they became personal. I started singing not as V of BTS, but as Kim Taehyung, the man who had seen both the beauty and the price of love. The noise didn't go away, but it began to fade into the background. And in its place, I found something I had lost for a long time: peace in imperfection. Sometimes, late at night, I still see articles pop up dissecting every move, every smile. But instead of frustration, I'd feel gratitude. Because even through all of it, the chaos, the misunderstanding, the fear, I was still here, still breathing, still loving. And that, I realized, is what it means to live honestly. Not to be perfect in the world's eyes, but to be real in your own. After all the noise, after all the sleepless nights, I found myself back in the studio. It was quiet, too quiet at first. There were no producers that day, no cameras, no staff, just me, a cup of lukewarm coffee, and an empty page on the desk. I remember staring at that page for hours. There were so many things I wanted to say, but every time I picked up the pen, I froze. Because I didn't want to write another hit song. I wanted to write something real, something that sounded like the voice I had lost somewhere between fame and fear. Then I looked at my reflection in the black piano surface and whispered to myself, "Just be honest, Taehyung. Don't make it sound perfect. Make it sound true." And that's how the first line came to me. It wasn't poetic, it wasn't clever. It was simply, "I'm still learning how to love myself when the world doesn't." When I sang it out loud, my voice cracked not because of the note, but because it was real. That single line carried months of exhaustion, confusion, and quiet hope. I began writing without thinking about the news, the fans, or the expectations. Every lyric came from a piece of memory. From the moment my wife told me to stop reading comments, from the silence of my mother's kitchen when she hugged me after everything, from the sound of my own footsteps in the hallway after a night of crying alone. It wasn't a sad song, it was an honest one. And in that honesty, I found something I didn't expect: peace. I recorded the demo myself in one take. It wasn't clean, but it was pure. When the last note faded, I just sat there in the dark, letting the echo fill the room. That was the first time in months that I didn't feel like an idol. I felt like a man who had been through something but still chose love over bitterness. The next day, I let my manager listen to it. He closed his eyes through the whole thing. When it ended, he said quietly, "That's not just a song, Tai. That's a confession." He was right. That song wasn't for the world, it was for me. It was my way of saying to myself, "You did the best you could." A few weeks later, the company heard it. They wanted to release it officially. At first, I hesitated. It felt too personal, too raw. But my wife said maybe someone out there needs to hear it too. So we did. We released it quietly. No big teasers, no flashy campaign. Just a simple post. A song from my heart. I didn't expect much, but the response, it surprised me. People said it felt different. They said they could feel the pain and peace in it at the same time. And for the first time since the chaos began, the world wasn't shouting, it was listening. There were messages from fans saying, "Thank you for reminding us that idols are human too. Your song made me cry because I've also been judged for loving honestly." And one message that I'll never forget: "You taught me that real love doesn't need to be understood by everyone, only by the ones who live it." I cried that night, not because of the praise, but because I realized something profound. Music had always been my bridge to the world, but this time it became my bridge back to myself. From that moment on, I started creating differently. I didn't hide behind metaphors or safe words anymore. I let my imperfections live in the lyrics, my flaws breathe through every melody. And maybe that's what healing really is, not erasing the scars, but turning them into songs that remind you how far you've come. Sometimes I still replay that demo, the unpolished version I recorded alone. It reminds me of that night in the studio when I finally stopped pretending to be okay and simply allowed myself to be. I didn't realize it then, but that song was the start of something new. A new chapter, not in my career, but in my soul. Because from that day forward, I wasn't just singing to be heard. I was singing to be understood. And in the echo of my own voice, I found the one thing I thought I had lost forever: myself. The release of that song felt like a quiet confession sent into a storm. No promotions, no dance challenge, no glossy teasers, just my voice, raw and unfiltered. But somehow there was enough. Within hours, it began to spread, not because of marketing, but because people felt it. I still remember waking up one morning, groggy from another late night, and my phone was buzzing nonstop. My wife was standing by the window, smiling faintly as she said, "Taehyung, you might want to check the charts." I laughed, half asleep. "What charts?" And she said softly, "All of them." When I opened my phone, I couldn't believe it. The song, the one I had recorded in one take, trembling, had reached the top across several countries. Not just as a BTS song, not as a Taehyung solo, but as something people called a song that speaks the truth. But it wasn't the numbers that hit me. It was the comments, thousands of them. Some said they played it on their wedding day. Others said they listened to it when they felt alone because it reminded them that love, no matter how complicated, is still worth it. There was one that made me pause for a long time. I don't know what Taehyung went through, but this song feels like forgiveness. Forgiveness? That word haunted me for days. Because maybe that's what the song really was. Not a love song, not a message to the fans, but a way of forgiving everyone who misunderstood, including myself. Soon, interview requests started flooding in. Everyone wanted to know who inspired the song. Is it about your wife? Was it written after the manager incident? I avoided most of them. Not because I didn't want to talk, but because I wanted the song to speak first. You see, when you explain too much, people stop feeling and start analyzing. And this song wasn't meant to be analyzed, it was meant to be felt. But there was one interview I agreed to, a small magazine that had always respected my work. The interviewer asked quietly, "What was going through your heart when you wrote that line?" "I'm still learning how to love myself when the world doesn't." I looked down and said, "That line isn't about fame, it's about humanity." Because no matter who you are, there's always a part of you that feels unseen. And sometimes love starts when you stop waiting for everyone to understand you. They didn't push for more, they just nodded. And for the first time in a long while, I felt understood without having to defend myself. Then something beautiful started happening. People stopped asking about the wedding scandal. They stopped speculating about my manager's words. Instead, they started talking about the music. Fan projects began appearing murals, art pieces, piano covers. There was even a letter writing campaign called Love Without Permission, inspired by my lyrics. And when I saw fans holding signs at concerts that read, "You taught us love is worth fighting for," I knew something had changed. The narrative wasn't about controversy anymore. It was about connection, and strangely, even my manager, the one who once tried to stop the wedding, became one of the people who helped me protect that peace. He started managing my interviews carefully, making sure I had space to breathe, to create, to just exist again. One night, after a long rehearsal, he came up to me quietly. "I was wrong back then," he said. "I thought protecting your image was protecting you. But I forgot that what makes you special isn't your image, it's your honesty." I didn't say anything at first, I just smiled, because I knew we had both grown from it. Maybe in his own way, he was learning how to love too. And I realized something I wish I had known earlier. You don't have to fight the world to prove your truth. Sometimes you just have to live it long enough for the world to see it. When I performed that song live for the first time, I could barely get through the bridge. The lights dimmed, the piano started, and I heard fans singing it back, every word, every breath. It was no longer just my story. It had become our story. That night, I looked out at the sea of purple lights and whispered to myself, maybe the pain was never a punishment. Maybe it was just a path to understanding. And when the final note faded, I bowed deeply, not as Taehyung the idol, but as Taehyung, the man who had learned that love, in its purest form, doesn't need permission, only courage. The night of the final concert of the tour felt different. The air was heavier, but not because of exhaustion. It was full of emotion, almost sacred. I could feel it from the moment I stepped backstage. The crew was quiet. My members were smiling softly, and even my manager, who used to be the strictest man in the room, had his eyes lowered in calm reflection. Before walking out, I stood in front of the mirror and stared at my own reflection. The same face that had once carried so much confusion now looked peaceful. Not perfect, not flawless, but real. I whispered to myself, "No matter what happens tonight, say it honestly." When the lights went out and the crowd started chanting my name, I felt a wave of warmth wash over me. Tens of thousands of people holding purple lights, their voices melting into one unified sound. And when the piano intro of the song began, I didn't feel like I was performing. I felt like I was coming home. As I sang the first verse, I looked around at the fans crying, at my members standing at the edge of the stage watching quietly, and at the camera lenses that had once felt like walls. But this time, they weren't walls. They were windows into hearts that were listening, not judging. Halfway through the performance, I couldn't sing anymore. My throat tightened. So I stopped, smiled, and let the crowd sing instead. It was the same line that had changed everything. "I'm still learning how to love myself when the world doesn't." And hearing it echoed back by thousands of voices, it felt like forgiveness multiply endless alive. After the show, I stayed behind when everyone left the stage. The lights dimmed, the crowd was still humming softly, and I knew I couldn't leave without saying what had been sitting in my heart for so long. So I took the mic one more time, and I spoke not as a performer, not as someone giving a speech, but as a person finally speaking his truth. You know, for a long time I thought love was something we had to earn through success, through image, through perfection. But I learned that real love doesn't need to be earned, it needs to be shared. I could see fans crying and my hands were shaking a little, but I continued. When people misunderstood me, when things got loud, there were moments I thought about giving up, not on music, but on being open. Because it hurt to be seen so clearly and still be questioned. But then I met someone who showed me that love doesn't mean never getting hurt. It means choosing to stay even when the world doesn't understand. I looked toward where my manager was standing. He smiled quietly and I smiled back. It wasn't about blame anymore. It was about how far we had come. That song you all sang tonight, it wasn't written for attention. It was written because I needed to remember that truth is stronger than fear. And if any of you out there are afraid of loving, afraid of being misunderstood, please don't hide. Someone, somewhere, will understand you. Maybe not today, maybe not soon, but they will. The crowd was completely silent. Not a phone light, not a cheer, just silence, the kind that means everyone's heart is listening. Then, softly, I added, to my manager, thank you for protecting me even when we disagreed. To my wife, who believed in love when it wasn't easy, thank you for teaching me what courage looks like. And to you, my fans, thank you for never giving up on the boy who was still learning to love himself. The crowd erupted into cheers and tears. For a moment, I stood there overwhelmed by everything, the light, the sound, the weight of all those emotions. And then I bowed. Not a formal stage bow, but a long, slow one, the kind that comes from gratitude deeper than words. As I stood up, I felt a strange peace. The story that once hurt to remember now felt like a song that had finally reached its final note. Not tragic, not perfect, just honest. After the concert, I went back to the same studio where it all began. The piano was still there. I sat down and played a few notes of the song again softly, almost like a whisper. I recorded one last version, not for release, but just for me. And when I listened back, I smiled. Because this time, I didn't hear the pain. I heard growth. People often ask me now, would you change anything if you could go back? And my answer is always the same. No, because every misunderstanding, every fight, every sleepless night led me here to peace, to understanding, to a love that doesn't need to shout to be real. Maybe that's what love truly is, not the absence of storms, but learning how to sing through them. So, to everyone who stayed, thank you for listening, for believing, and for walking through this story with me. This wasn't just my journey, it was ours. And as long as I can still sing, I'll keep telling stories. Not to prove who I am, but to remind you that even when life gets loud, you can always find your own melody again. Because sometimes healing doesn't sound like applause. It sounds like silence, followed by a single voice saying, I understand. And that's enough. When I look back now, I don't see pain anymore. I see growth. Everything that once hurt became a lesson about love, honesty, and courage. I learned that no matter how loud the world gets, the truth always finds its way home. So if you're listening, remember this love doesn't need to be perfect to be real. Sometimes it just needs to be brave. And for everyone who stayed by my side through it all, thank you. You are the reason I still believe in love.